This is, without a doubt, the best national college football rivalry that exists. USC and Notre Dame. Think about all the great ones, Alabama, Auburn, Ohio State, Michigan, confined within conferences. But the West Coast, the Midwest, two illustrious, prestigious universities and football programs and traditions, and they renew the rivalry. The next chapter is in South Bend on a Saturday night. We got Ben Buildin on the line from Slap the Sign, who joins us on a regular basis to talk Notre Dame football. Ben, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm getting anxious for this game. As I told you before we started recording, I'm on my way out to South Bend to take this one in, so it should be a really fun one. I love when Notre Dame and USC get to play every year. I pretty much try to make it to the Notre Dame USC game every year when it's in South Bend because of the tradition of the fact that USC is just a cool opponent to watch, even as a Notre Dame fan, even though there's the hatred there or whatever. But I'm anxious. I'm really excited and can't wait to go.
There are sets of colors and uniforms that get on the same field, and whether that's at the LA Coliseum or in South Bend for this particular rivalry, where there's just magic. It's just a certain Ohio State, Michigan, USC, UCLA, where there's just just a color scheme that we brings back memories of seeing those two teams in that setting, and at Notre Dame Stadium, USC and Notre Dame. And if I remember correctly, we had a conversation in the offseason in which we had a fun topic just in regards to talking about, favorite players and games and that sort of thing. And I remember USC games figuring prominently in many of your answers. This one is a big one for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my, and this wasn't the first Notre Dame game I ever attended by any means, but one of the more vivid memories that I have is the Bush Push game. I was there with my dad, and so that still. I mean, I can still remember the view that I was looking at the field from whenever it was 4th and 9 and Leinart hits whatever the receiver was over the top. I remember the Notre Dame cornerback that got burned on that play. It was Ambrose Wooden. And I just remember that whole sequence very vividly. And so I don't know. And like I say, I just like going to Notre Dame and USC because it means a lot. And I don't know, like Notre Dame, obviously being the Fighting Irish, they kind of have their themed mascot, and USC is very much the same, if that kind of makes sense. Like Notre Dame has the Irish Guard, and USC has, the Trojans and the horse Traveler and all that. And so I think that there's like kind of a lot of similarities in, kind of the all the bells and whistles that go on outside of the football game. And then, I think obviously there's been quite a few meaningful games over the past, especially the past 20 years, whether it was more meaningful for USC or Notre Dame or both. But it seems like there's something riding on the line every time that these two teams get together. And that's part of why I love it. And it also occurs at a great time of year. I mean, October in South Bend, I think if you ever get to go to a Notre Dame football game, I'd suggest, even regardless of who they're playing, go during the fall. I mean, I think it's just one of the greatest places on earth, to be honest with you. And I don't know, a lot of good feels come with this game. I'm just over talking it a little bit because I'm just so excited.
That's why you're on here. Talk it all. So I don't need to talk. You do all the talking because all the knowledge and the enthusiasm is coming out of you. And correct me if I'm wrong, the games in South Bend are mid-October games typically, and the games in LA are the last game of the season.
That is correct.
Which is very odd.
Want to come,
cool, but it's odd.
Yeah, USC doesn't want to come to South Bend at the end of November. That's for sure.
Yeah, so USC, just looking at their situation right now, they're in a strange place because they are a pretty decided underdog to lose another non-conference game. And they only have one conference loss, so they're very much in the mix to win what's a pretty poor division. So with a win against Utah, they are in the driver's seat to a certain extent, not necessarily the driver's seat, but they notched a big win in conference to put themselves in a good place there. But out of conference, they're losing these games, and this would appear to be another one. Not that they don't have a good shot at winning, but they're a decided underdog. So from a national perspective, it's not big for USC. It's big because it's the rivalry. But for Notre Dame, my goodness, I don't know if the loss at Georgia hurt you or helped you. Whether it hurt you or helped you is kind of minimalized because if it hurt you, it didn't hurt you much because you looked really good at a very difficult place to play against one of the most talented teams in the country. And if it helped you, obviously a loss can only help you so much. But your thoughts about it, I don't think we've spoken since the big game at Georgia, just in regards to the way I thought Georgia looked like the better team, but not by much, not substantially. Obviously, Notre Dame had the ball on the Georgia side of the field with a chance to win the game.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, it is kind of hard to put your foot on whether or not it's, whether Notre Dame was helped or hurt by that. I podcast with a guy named John that he raised an interesting point that it almost, a lot of people were saying, well, you looked really good against, one of the best teams in the country that can only help, blah, blah. But at the same time, it's like, I almost would have preferred them to beat Georgia and then lose to like Virginia the next week, because now if it comes down to a point, like say Georgia loses a game the rest of the year or whatever, now, if you're looking at Georgia or Notre Dame for that fourth spot in the playoff or something like that, you would assume Georgia gets the tiebreaker in that instance. Whereas, if Notre Dame had, has one loss against Virginia and it comes down to a one-loss Notre Dame versus a one-loss Georgia, well, Notre Dame has the tiebreaker there. So I don't know. It's an interesting way to look at it. Notre Dame has, I guess, kind of an uphill battle to get into the college football playoff. A lot has to go their way. It probably, I would venture to say, isn't going to happen. But I don't know. In terms of that game, I mean, I think a lot of Notre Dame people, and I'm proud to say that I wasn't one of these people in this instance, but really had themselves sort of psyched out before that game even started. And I think a lot of national media people really kind of overthought it and just kind of forgot that even though Notre Dame, lost pretty handily to Clemson, they still were a pretty darn good football team. And, a game that occurs in week 4. I mean, there's not a ton of separation that happens early in the college football season, to be honest with you. So I don't know. I was not really at all surprised by the way Notre Dame played. If you'd have told me that Notre Dame would have had the ball in their hand with a chance to go win it on the last possession of the game without even telling me what the score was, I'd have said that 100 times out of 100, I would take that. And they did. The offense didn't really do what they were supposed to do, but you live, you learn, you move on. And overall, I feel all right. At some point, I said this on my own show a bunch of times. At some point, like, it would be nice to win one of those, but I mean, by the same token, this one was a little bit different, to be honest with you. So I don't know. There are mixed feelings about it. I mean, I don't think any Notre Dame fan is particularly down in the dumps about this Notre Dame team right now. Genuinely, there are concerns about the offense and things, but I mean, I think a lot of people, for the most part, are fairly happy.
Yeah, there's only so many teams in the country that would be expected to go to Athens under those circumstances. And we know how Notre Dame was affected, especially along the offensive front against that crowd noise. And that you can never, when you start to factor penalties into a drive, determine how much did this hurt you being 3rd and 8 instead of third and 12 instead of 3rd and 2.
Sure.
Maybe that's a drive killer. It probably is a drive killer. So you only get so many drives against a team like Georgia, in which the game's played at a certain tempo that's not that fast. There's only so many possessions. So those penalties against you in that environment. So then you translate that to what you would think it would be at a neutral environment, that, oh, wow, this might have been a really, really competitive game, which it was in and of itself. So,
Right.
Yeah, but to your point, the scenario, and we'll never know, of beating Georgia and then losing to a respectable team like a Virginia, where people aren't going to go crazy. Virginia's not great, but people aren't going to be like, that's embarrassing. They're going to be like, okay, they slipped up one week, but this is what they're capable of. They're capable of beating a Georgia. Might have been a better scenario for you for that narrative, but also the more practical narrative that you brought up of just having the head-to-head tiebreaker of sorts, possibly.
Right. And to your point about the third down thing, I mean, Notre Dame has been very poor on third down all year. And, and even Book's passing numbers are, compared to last year into this year, are much poorer on third down. And, I was asked about that at some point and brought that up that, well, I mean, this year he's been in 3rd and 11, 3rd and 12 quite a bit because of false start penalties, because they haven't been able to get a good running game going and that type of thing. So, I don't know. You can what if it to death, I suppose. But if you take out a couple of those, penalties, then that game might just go a different way at the end. I mean, maybe Notre Dame gets a field goal and then they're trying to get a field goal at the end and instead of, try to get a touchdown and take the lead or something like that. I mean, there's a million scenarios, but anyway, to each his own, I suppose.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We've got Ben Buildin on the line talking Notre Dame football. You can join Ben and the rest of the staff there at Slap the Sign covering Notre Dame athletics. You can get my Week 7 college football predictions. I was 13-6 against the spread last week. And grab those at the link in the description section below next to Voice of College Football Community. All right. But you did go and you beat Virginia then the next week by 15 points, which was really the highlight plays of that game were those strip sacks and those forced turnovers that went the distance or near distance in the other direction. So how do you feel about the Virginia performance, knowing that Virginia team's a good team, not a great team, but a top 20 to 25 type team?
Yeah, I think I felt really good about that game, to be honest with you, because when you look at teams that have been really good, over the past 15, 20 years, certainly, I mean, it's easy to highlight, we're talking a little bit about Notre Dame and USC, so I'll use USC as an example, but you talk about, Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush and all of that stuff. But I think, what truly has made a lot of teams really good is their defensive line. I mean, that's why Alabama, to me, has, done so well consistently every single year. Same with Clemson. They're built on the defensive line where it's just hard to get anything done on offense against a team like that. And watching Notre Dame play against Virginia, it just sort of seemed like the defensive line, was, they were here and there in the first half, but in the second half, whenever things started to get sort of frustrating for Notre Dame, it's like the defensive line took it upon themselves and was just like, forget this. We're just gonna win this game real quick, and then then we can win it going away. And I feel like that's what they did. They dominated in the second half in a way that I haven't seen a Notre Dame defensive line dominate in quite some time. And so that, to me, is the biggest takeaway of this team, and that particular game especially, is that Notre Dame's defensive line is pretty deep and they're pretty darn good. And even when they lose a couple of their better pass rushers to the NFL after this season, they've got guys coming in behind them that are going to be pretty darn good as well. So that, if there's one thing that has me really excited about Notre Dame football, it's that I think their defensive line is, up there with some of the better defensive lines in college football. And that hopefully that means that Notre Dame is going to be pretty good for a pretty long time.
Ben Buildin talking Notre Dame football with the big game against USC in South Bend on Saturday night. USC has cycled down through 3 quarterbacks, and they've been able to, forge a path to the possible Pac-12 championship game despite some issues there, and they've held up pretty well for the most part. They have a very odd team in some respects because they're just so talented in some areas, and other areas aren't anywhere close to USC standards, and this is the result we get, is a very uneven performance from week to week, and they've really taken on a tough schedule. And this is kind of the pinnacle of it right here, having to go to South Bend. Last trip out there, if I remember correctly, Notre Dame just laid waste to the Trojans and a team that Sam Darnold took to a Pac-12 championship and a Cotton Bowl. 49-14, I believe, was the score. Do you have any reservations about this game based on weaknesses or minor deficiencies you've seen out of Notre Dame, or what you're hearing out of USC? I know that they've got those receivers that they'll certainly chuck it up in the air and let them go get it.
Yeah, and I think you're right about that. I mean, the one reservation I think that you could have as a Notre Dame fan against USC is, can Notre Dame cover all of those guys? Well, I think the answer is going to be yes, because USC, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, you honestly might know better than I do about this, but I mean, USC's strong suit is not their offensive line. Let's just put it that way. So I think when it comes down to it, whether or not Notre Dame can cover those receivers real well isn't going to matter a ton. I mean, I'm sure USC is going to hit on a couple of chunk plays. I mean, in a rivalry game with, USC's athletes, I mean, that's just going to happen. But I think Notre Dame's defensive line is going to be able to control it enough that it's not going to matter. And I think that the offense is, hopefully going to put enough together that when USC does hit on, a couple plays and score a few points, that they're going to be able to outscore them. So I think it'll be a close game throughout the first half, much like the Virginia game. kind of was for Notre Dame. And then I think Notre Dame will find a way to go in, make adjustments offensively and defensively and win the game, and I forget exactly what the spread was, but I think it was maybe around 10 somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think I pretty well agree with that. I mean, I think it'll be pretty close and Notre Dame will win by a score or two. I mean, by a score or two, I mean like a touchdown or more, I guess is kind of what I'm thinking.
That pretty much seems to make sense based on what the two teams have shown us, and Notre Dame being at home, that they're decidedly the better team, but not by a great margin. But decidedly, there's no question that based on what the two teams have shown us, Notre Dame's just better. Ben Buildin talking on Notre Dame football. We always enjoy the conversation. Is there anything we've missed, Ben?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's a big, I guess maybe the one thing is that it's a big recruiting type thing, this particular game. I mean, Notre Dame tries to recruit California in general, especially Southern California, pretty well. And obviously this game goes a long way in Notre Dame's visibility in the state of California when they go out to USC every other year and then Stanford on, I mean, they kind of flip-flop those games out in California every year. So, I mean, I know Notre Dame's got quite a few guys coming in for this one. So, you always obviously want on, official visit weekend, you want to put on a good showing. And I'm sure some of those guys that are coming in, I know some of those guys that are coming in are also considering USC. So it's big in that regard. And it's big, for the, the landscape of recruiting in general. But it just, I mean, it's going to be fun. And there's so many layers of intrigue to this one. And like I keep saying, I'm fired up for it.
Well, safe travels, Ben, and enjoy the game. And I hope it's just another classic chapter in Notre Dame USC.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me on again.